All right, I'll just say welcome everybody to the Name It podcast, where today I'm so pleased to talk to Kierra Sunae, who is the executive director and founder of the Healing Footprints Foundation, all about grief. And I just, in this last year, have been thinking about her so much. She spoke at our conference last year, New Power fundraising conference, and I'm just so grateful to have her here. So Ms. Kierra, thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, to see your bright face on the other side of my screen. So it's definitely, I'm excited, very excited. Thank you so much.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with people about who you are and what you do?
I think you summed up who I am, which is something I'm very proud of. It's one of those things that I shied away originally, like to be proud that you're a grief expert, to even say it. It took me a while to even acknowledge that that was my expertise, and it was the insight that I've gained from personal experience and then interacting with so many people. And it was something I didn't want to own originally, that how, find something else to be an expert in, but it's honestly who I am. And I'm no longer shying away from the light that I bring in such a dark space. And yeah, that's who I am. And I'm honestly proud of it. And I find joy in sharing, the goodness that I believe people can find in grief if they truly embraced it and acknowledged it and label it for what it is. So yeah.
I am so grateful for the frame that you gave me, because this last year I've been crying more in front of people than I've ever cried before in my whole life.
And I remember when we first met, you were like, no, that's not me. I'm not a crier. I can't do that in front of people. Yes.
I changed my tune.
Yes, that's great. See, progress.
That's right. And I didn't know that, like, the more you tamp down your grief, the more you tamp down your joy. And you really taught me that. And I can't thank you enough, because what kind of half life was I living before I met you?
Yes. And it's something that we want to avoid, because we more than likely know that it will bring some type of pain or sadness or feelings that we would prefer to not have. So a lot of times we want to avoid the grief. It doesn't matter how it manifests in our life. It's showing up as bitterness, as hatred, as a disconnect in relationships. So it's there. We're just choosing not to acknowledge it. So it doesn't go away. Just because you don't want to acknowledge that you're grieving or label it as grief doesn't mean that you're not experiencing it. It's there. So life will be so much easier for us if we just acknowledge that we're actually grieving and allow ourselves, give ourselves permission to feel whatever it is that we're feeling. Also understanding that those feelings change from day to day, from moment to moment, and having that understanding is how we get to a place of joy, for sure.
Yeah, you're so right. One of the things that you talked about last year was that there's so many different kinds of grief. And I think during the pandemic, people are kind of starting to realize that, because they're sitting at home and looking at themselves for the first time in maybe a long time, maybe ever. And so I saw a video by Francis Weller a couple weeks ago about the 5 different kinds of grief. And I just wanted to get your take on it. He said the 5 kinds of grief are the one everybody thinks of, which is, losing a person, like a personal loss. And then there's ancestral grief, where, our ancestors were close to the land and close to each other, and now we're all scattered and disconnected. Another kind of grief is the planetary grief. And I think where a lot of us are experiencing that right now with the wildfires and the floods and the, coronavirus on top of that, and, a lot of people dying. And Black Lives Matter too is a manifestation of grief and wanting to change from that. And then the grief of a part of yourself that was never honored or seen by your family. Maybe they didn't like your anger, maybe they didn't like your sexuality or whatever,
Mhm.
and then the grief of unmet expectations. And you talked about that a little bit last year. So what do you think of those different kinds of grief?
I agree with all of them. One,
Mhm.
not just of their existence, but how we can each experience those things and experience them simultaneously. I think in our past, most of us imagine grief to be the loss of life. And when I say the loss of life, I mean the person actually dies. We grieve the death of someone, but you can lose someone and they still be alive. We see that in relationships, in romantic relationships, relationships between parents and children, where you become estranged from your parents, estranged from siblings. You've grown up with an absent father. You can grieve those relationships. So the person does not have to be deceased in order for you to be grieving that person. So I think it's important when we talk about the loss of life that we acknowledge that the person can very well still be alive and you still grieve that person. We also see it in relationships with parents. If you're caring for an elderly parent, it's important to acknowledge when they start to show signs of Alzheimer's and things of that nature, that you can grieve that this person is still alive and they're not who they used to be. That's true for other people as well as yourself. So when we talk about unmet expectations, it can be your personal aspirations, things that you've dreamed about, careers, having children, being married. I think one of the things that have come out during COVID and this time of quarantine is that if you had a life plan of when you're going to get married, when you're going to get children, being in quarantine, not being able to date, challenges that timeline that you may have created for yourself. It also puts you in a position where you're at home alone and you are forced to face the fact that you may be unmarried, without children, you are not in a position to date. So that can bring you feelings of grief because you've had all those expectations. However, you have to be in a position to acknowledge that you're actually grieving, that the sadness that you feel, the disappointment that you feel, the anger that you feel. We often have to be sure when we talk about the different phases of grief and the different feelings and reactions that we have. Anger is a very prominent reaction and response to grief. So we want to be sure that when we're having all those feelings, that we're labeling it for what it is, that you're actually grieving. You're not bitter and upset because the relationship ended. You're grieving because of what you expected that relationship to become. So it's not that you necessarily want to go back into that relationship, be it a heterosexual or same-sex relationship, whatever relationship is best for you. You still can grieve whatever it is that you imagined for that relationship to be. The same goes for the what was very prominent for us in the infant loss community is that you lose those milestones every year when school starts. We have parents who are grieving because they were looking forward to kindergarten for getting their kids prepared for kindergarten, and they no longer have that opportunity. So they are grieving those lost milestones. During COVID, we had people who were planning weddings, and those experiences were taken away. Children who were anticipating college and high school graduation, those experiences were taken away. So we have those loss of experiences that we have had that all deserve to be grieved and grieved in a healthy way. Grieve openly. A lot of times we've discussed earlier about disenfranchised grief, and is this belief that you have to keep your grief to yourself, that you have to be silent about it, that you can't share it because no one cares. Oh, it wasn't a big deal. You can have other relationships, you can have other opportunities, you can have another job. No, I want to grieve this experience. I want to grieve this particular job. I had hopes and dreams and a career plan prepared. You have the right to grieve. Allow no one to take away your right to grieve. Despite what it is, despite the circumstances, you have the right to grieve.
Yes. Oh, say it again. Say it again.
And the world outside is moving, so you have all these signs that you need to move on. No, you have the right to grieve. Take your time. You have the right. Yes,
hmm hmm
yes, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought up the disenfranchised grief because
Mm-hmm.
with the rush to quote unquote get back to normal, we can't. There is no normal. And normal wasn't working, So um I think a better phrase for us to use instead of get back to normal or get back to work is begin again. But begin again
Yes.
with this understanding of, you know, you have less capacity to focus, you have less capacity to process, and you need to take time to feel.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes.
So thank you for sharing that. That's real. What people are feeling is real, and they can't just take it off.
Mm-mm, mm-mm. Or move on. We're rushed to move on to the next thing.
Mhm.
I have to go on. You have bills to pay. You have a family to take care of. You have work that needs to be done. The world needs you. So again, we have all these cues that you need to move on. Move on to the next thing. At some point, you will deal with your grief. At some point, it will manifest in a way that will require your full attention. So at
Mhm.
some point, you will deal with it. It can show up as a massive breakdown, an anxiety attack. It can manifest in so many ways. So that's why you want to deal with it in a healthy way. One, when it's current, you want to deal with it now. Don't wait 10 years from now, because of course, over 10 years, a lot of life has happened. A lot of grief is piling up. So it's very easy to lose sight of the grief that lies underneath because so much begins to pile on top of it. So that's why I always encourage patients and clients to deal with to be present, to acknowledge what it is that you're experiencing today so that you can deal with it in a healthy way, especially when it shows up in the form of grief. You want to deal with it presently.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, it makes me feel like babies almost are much wiser than we are.
They are. Yes. They stay so focused on today. They aren't worried about tomorrow, the next 3 hours. No, they're present.
They are. They are.
They are.
And if they're sad, they're like, ah, they just let
Uh-huh.
it
And
out.
then 5 minutes later, you're like, oh, they're happy again. That's because they dealt with their sadness when it happened. That's how they're
Right.
able to move on to the next emotion. And they're not carrying or allowing their emotions to snowball. They deal with it, and then it's easy to move on to the next emotion or the next thing, the next feeling when you've dealt with whatever it is that you were feeling at that moment.
Mhm. And, that brings me to, the nonprofit sector and organizations right now. And,
Mhm,
um, what have you noticed in the last year, as people have come to you in their grief in these different organizations? Like, what have you
mhm.
seen?
I've seen that we are grieving collectively. I am actually proud of our acknowledgement that grief does exist, and it exists in ways other than the loss of life. I think there has definitely been a heightened awareness that what we are experiencing is grief. That makes me proud. That makes my job actually easier because people do recognize that they have the potential to be grieving. What I can do is help people pinpoint what it is that they're experiencing, and then of course give them healthy tools to cope with it. But I do realize that as a lot of organizations are acknowledging that there is this collective grief, and because we are all grieving collectively, I think as a community we feel the need to pull and push one another forward, and that has brought me a lot of joy. That a lot of times grief can leave you feeling lonely, like, oh, I'm the only person experiencing this. I'm the only person that will understand. There's a lot of loneliness built into that grief journey. I think what I've seen over this past year is this need to lean on one another, to share stories, to share how you got through it, what benefited you, and I love to see that when it comes to grief, that we are truly building community. That if we grieve together, we can laugh together, we can find joy together, and I love that part of what is definitely feeling more like a community for sure.
That reminds me of my conversation with Veronica Garcia earlier this week. She is the head of the WRAP, which is Wealth Reclamation Academy of Practitioners, that came out of the Grassroots Fundraising Journal, which was going on
Mhm.
for 30 years. And one of the things she said was that our deepest wealth lies in community, and the people that
Yes.
don't have a community are actually very poor. So
Hmm.
I really love that you emphasize that community aspect, because it is true. Grief can be very isolating, and to
Yes.
have people around you saying, we're all grieving this
Hmm.
together is, it gives me a little warm feeling in my heart, you know?
Yes, yes. And especially during these moments in quarantine, when if you are either quarantining with family, friends, alone, it has forced us to examine what's really important. Where do our values lie? Not being in the workplace, if you were a former, I would hope, reformed workaholic, now you have to reevaluate the commitment that you're making to the workplace and how it impacts your family. So we have these moments of reflection that I think many of us didn't have previously, and it's causing us to one, examine our current community, our personal community, and using that as an opportunity to now build the relationships that we see that we need. If you have no one that you can call and be honest about your fears and the anxiety that you may feel, find someone to fill in that void that you're having. That's how we build community. That's how we build relationships. That's how we lean on one another. And I think that's how we become healthy, not just as individuals, but as a community.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm, that is so true. And it actually like anticipates a question I was going to ask you,
Hmm.
which is, how has what you've done changed in the last year? And you kind of said, like, well, now people are asking me to talk about this collective grief. So
Yes.
organizations are coming and asking you, help our organization, help our leaders, help our workers process this collective grief and this personal,
Yes.
what I'm hearing you say.
Yes, I'm definitely getting more requests from organizations who are recognizing. I think at one point we wanted to separate the workplace and grief. You grieve at home, you grieve away from the workplace. But now that we're all grieving, let's talk about it. And when we're talking about grief, when we see social justice, your personal loss, but one of the other areas is all of the changes that we're experiencing in the workplace, that you have coworkers who are being laid off. And how do you feel about that? Before we didn't discuss that. That's a part of the business. Well, I worked closely with this person. I had a passion project that I'm working on with my coworker, and now they're gone. There is an emotional impact there. There's a mental impact there that very well starts to affect your work. We've dealt with in the past low morale in the workplace when it comes to restructuring and what's happening outside the building and the organization. However, it has an impact. So it's important to discuss those things and provide a healthy and safe space to discuss how we're actually feeling about it, and then give people the tools to move forward so that it does not have a long-term impact on the organization. So that's one lane that has opened up for me during COVID, that over the past year, that I had not anticipated. And kudos to all the leaders and executives who recognize that it's important to provide their employees with a safe space to speak openly together about that grief. And I think it definitely creates a healthier work environment. You now have healthy and happy employees. And then you have employees who trust their leadership because now they understand that you care about them. It's not just the bottom line, you care about how they're able to perform their work. So I think it overall definitely creates a healthy work environment and ultimately helps to move organizations forward.
Oh, that's so true. And that like sort of like leads into my question, which was, if the virus keeps going over the next year, how are we going to manage our grief? And you kind of said, well, it's what we've been doing, but if
Yes.
this keeps going, what's the next step?
There will be more of what we're doing. We need to talk about it more. We need to provide space in the workplace, in your home, in your friendships, to be honest about what it is that you're feeling. It's okay. It's okay to show up because I need a hug. It's okay to show up to work today because I'm tired of the blank walls in my home. It's okay to show up and allow people to be honest about how they're feeling during those moments. Extended lunch breaks, meetings where we have these what we used to call in corporate America these check-in meetings, but they were always about business. How are you on your projects and your timelines? We need to get to a place where we start to ask our coworkers and our colleagues, how are you feeling today? And on the receiving end, when someone asks you, how are you feeling today? Be honest about your feelings. I think we need to do more of that. There needs to be more honesty about how it is that we're feeling and the struggles that we're having. Because I think when we have those moments, what we'll learn is we're not alone. You're not alone. You're not the only one that's experiencing whatever loss that you're experiencing. And the advantage of sharing it is that we now create this bond. We have this common experience or this common take that we can share. And we can allow that to create a more secure relationship, give our relationship room to grow and start at that place. So definitely, I think going forward, we're going to see more honesty because at this point, you can fake it for a few months that you're okay. Every time your girlfriend calls and you're like, yeah, I'm okay. At some point, you're going to have to say, I am not okay. I've been showing up to work every day and I'm not okay.
What you're reminding me of is how capitalism, patriarchy, and white supremacy break down the bonds between people,
Oh,
and
yeah.
how, you know what I mean? Like what you're inviting people into is to deepen and repair those relational bonds.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
and healing the wounds that this culture has caused, this dominant
Yes.
culture, which is bad for absolutely everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So I really appreciate you bringing home the little things people do to become vulnerable together and
Mm-hmm.
stay with the trouble. If you're not,
Yes.
something's not right, what's up, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think for as well, like what you're offering people right now is to develop that self-compassion, that you
Yes.
can't just pretend inside of yourself that you're okay, because it's just going to
Mm-hmm.
hit you further down the line.
Mm-hmm.
So I really appreciate you not just asking people to look outward, but look inward.
Yes.
You can't extend that compassion to yourself, then you can't give it to anybody else.
Mm-hmm. And you brought up something very important when you talk about vulnerability, which is a key part to one, grieving, and especially connecting with others, that you have to be in a place where you feel safe being vulnerable. And I think that's the call that I would personally make to organizations, is to make it safe for people to be vulnerable. It may affect my work today because I'm grieving, I'm upset, whatever the case may be. However, if you allowed me the time today to deal with my feelings and my emotions in an honest way, it will make me a better employee tomorrow. However, if I don't deal with it today, this is how it gets stretched out for months and months and months. And now my work performance declines because you didn't allow space for me to deal with this. It's not that it's major and it's life changing and it makes me lazy and a horrible. No, it's just that today I need to deal with my grief. I implore in executives to allow space for employees to deal with their grief so that they can rebound quicker. They become better employees faster. They can help lift others because of the experience that they've had. I think it's important for us, especially when we talk about vulnerability in the workplace, is to allow people to be humans. Don't deny people, your employees, their humanity by treating them like workhorses because you're here to do a job. So do the job despite how you feel. Do the job despite what's going on in your life. Do the job despite that the world is crumbling around us, but I still need you to meet this deadline. We have to
It's
get to a place.
dehumanizing. It's dehumanizing.
Yes, yes, it is. It is. And it leads to a workforce that is resentful, that becomes rebellious. I think that's where this is about to head. We're about to see a lot more a lot more rebellion in the workplace, where people are going to say, forget it, if you can't. And it's not that they want to be served in the workplace or you need to meet my mental challenges. I want to make sure that we're separating the two, that is not the purpose of an employer, to meet all of your mental and emotional needs. That's not what we're discussing here. We're just saying to leave space for your employees to be human, that they have feelings, they have fears, they have concerns, they have mistrust, and there has to be a space to express and feel those things in an honest and open way.
I really appreciate you going against the narrative of the machine like domination, the
Mhm.
dehumanization of capitalism. And I honestly don't think laziness exists. And I think if you think an
Mhm.
employee is lazy, you should maybe take a look at yourself as an employer and
Yes.
say, am I
Yeah.
supporting them during this really difficult time? Is there something I could do
Mhm.
better? And you could even ask them, how could I better support you? How could I
Yes.
deliberately build trust with you?
Mhm.
And that's just one of the many things that you could do. So thank you so much. Ms. Kierra, thank you so, so much. How can people work with you? If they say, okay, I know my workforce is demotivated, I know they're grieving, but I don't have the tools to help them.
Mhm.
How do they
So
work with
I have a set of tools that I have ready and available. I can come into an organization, of course, after learning a little more about the needs of the organization. I have services where I can provide webinars. I have courses. I do provide one-on-one support for executives. I can be reached at kierrasunae.com. And there you will see a list of my services that I do offer. And it's a joy. I've gotten great response. I'm actually proud. I remember the first time I was contacted by an organization, and it was after a speaking event. And I talked about grief in the workplace. And there was an executive that was present, and she was like, wow, I think we need this at my organization. The organization was in the middle of being restructured, and she couldn't deal with employees coming into her office wanting to unload on her about how they felt about it, because she thought, like I described earlier, I don't care how you feel about the decisions that we make. The decisions needed to be made. During my speaking event, she realized that she needed to honor the humanity of her employees and how they felt that their coworkers were being escorted out the building with boxes, And everyone else is expected to just show up at the meeting the next day and act like nothing happened. We have to address it. So I was actually proud in that moment, and we've seen great returns from organizations who acknowledge the need to give their employees a safe space to discuss how it is that they're feeling, and not to beat up on executives about the tough decisions, because they're tough decisions that they're making, and there is grief built into those tough decisions, because of course they have relationships with employees and executives. They had dreams of what will become of projects. So there's both ends, and that's something else that I like to make sure that I bring out in my presentations, that it's not just the employees or the people on the receiving end that are grieving. The people who have to make those decisions also have their grief that they're experiencing. So that's one of the joys that I found, and something that I like to share when I make space for us to have that healthy relationship with grief in the workplace. So again, I can be reached at kierrasunae.com.
Wonderful. And if people come to our party at the end of the patriarchy in October, they'll get to hear you speak and learn
Yes.
more. And if this has piqued your interest, please do come.
Mhm.
And thank you so, so much again, Miss Kierra. I love, love, love talking to you and listening to you. And
Yes.
it's so healing just to know that we have the permission to grieve.
Yes, yes, yes. If I could give one gift to everyone, it would be that. It would be permission to grieve.